Greetings, I'm Eric Draven. I'm your special guest lecturer for this week. Chad asked me to come in and talk to you about what it's like living the life of a Gothic character itself. If you want to learn more about me, you can see the documentary of my life story called The Crow from 1994. This tells a story about how me and my beautiful girlfriend, living in a lovely Gothic apartment in a Gothic city, basically got killed by these vicious villains. Because of the trauma of my murder and her death, I was brought back to life and kind of connected with this crow, and I went on a vicious murder killing spree. You'll see a lot of the main themes of the Gothic canon, the Gothic literature that Chad's talked about already coming up in my life. A lot of light and dark going on, good and evil, very clear distinction between villains and good people, heroes, all of that. But there's also a lot going on about the line between life and death, madness, revenge, vengeance. It's a very emotive tale and a very strong feeling tale, which aligns with the romantic tradition more generally. But you definitely see a lot of the trappings of the Gothic genre in my life story. Hello again. You may be wondering after that last little bit of lecture the extent to which my life can be seen as a literary narrative. So Chad's talked a lot about the literary history of the Crow. So we talk about Mary Shelley, Lord Byron, people who are very part of what we would call the canon of literature. So they're literary texts that are seen as being having a lot of cultural clout, being very high quality, and they're in a list of literary texts that are up there with things like Shakespeare, Chaucer, in this grand tradition of literature. Interestingly though, a lot of Gothic fiction, especially The Crow, the documentary about my life, and also many other Gothic texts, especially contemporary ones, are not seen as literature at all. They're sometimes seen as genre or genre fiction, which is seen as popular culture or low culture. So this is quite a strong distinction in literary studies and literary analysis and textual analysis. What is really interesting is that at the time that the Gothic texts were being created that we talked about there, they were actually seen as quite lowbrow, and they were seen as kind of cheap and nasty. There was a term penny dreadfuls that would go around. So this is the interesting thing about Mary Shelley and Percy Bysshe Shelley. Percy Bysshe Shelley was the famous poet of the time. He was the one who was creating these amazing narratives and amazing epic poems that would last into the ages, whereas Mary Shelley was hardly known at all at the time for her Frankenstein. Now, of course, she's very well known for Frankenstein, and Frankenstein is considered literature itself, is considered literary fiction. So we may wonder whether the Gothic narratives or the horror narratives that are looked down upon these days would actually be considered as literary fiction or as a little bit more highbrow in the future. Something to ponder. Greetings again. So we've just heard from Chad about how freedom is a key theme in Gothic fiction. Sometimes the constraint or the lack of freedom is a key theme in Gothic fiction. And it's quite important and interesting to reflect on the extent to which my own life as a Gothic narrative itself is free or not free, and the kinds of constraints that were going on in my life. When my girlfriend and I were alive, we were actors and artists, and we sought to express our freedom and express our sense of identity creatively in that way. That's where this makeup came from when I visited my home after my death. However, at the time, we were also quite broke. And as everybody knows, or any student knows, not having money really is a big constraint on us. And then as we were getting pressure from the landlords to sell our house, our lives became more and more constrained in various ways. We then suffered the ultimate constraint and the ultimate denial of our freedom by being murdered. I mean, there's really no other stronger form of having your freedom taken away than having someone kill you. And that's why murder and death is such a strong theme throughout Gothic fiction. But the ways in which we were murdered, the brutality and the horrific nature of the murder enabled me to actually become free of the boundary of life and death itself. So in one way, I am completely free of life and death. I walk the streets almost forever, until my vengeance is complete, at least. Obviously, though, this is another kind of constraint, isn't it? Because I'm not able to be at peace, I'm not able to be at rest. This is, again, the classic theme of the zombie, the ghost, the vampire, the undead being who isn't quite free of life and isn't quite free of death either. So, yeah, freedom, not so much for me, I'm afraid. Hello again. So we've heard about how the Gothic as a genre can be changed itself. We can bend the boundaries, we can stretch the boundaries of the Gothic genre, but we can also stretch the media in which it is portrayed. So although my life story in that documentary true to life film, The Crow, came out in 1994, that's the way that I am best known to the public at large. I'm also a transmedia figure as well. So the story of my life was originally told in comic book form and then adapted to the film. There were then multiple comic books after that. There was even a video game after that. So this idea of transmedia is very, very interesting in terms of creative production and the freedoms and constraints that occur with that. Obviously, when you have your life being told via a comic book and then it's moved into a film, there are lots of constraints about how that film is told. Who is cast? What it'll look like? Who produces it? Who directs it? So although you're getting this freedom through a new media formation, you're also getting multiple constraints in that creative production itself. And then every time a text or a narrative transmediates, there's simultaneous freedom and constraint that occurs, which is the kind of paradox that we see in creative productions itself.